Welcome to this one-off session of the Education Select Committee on music hubs. And this morning we have a full panel of witnesses. Our first panel consists of John de la Cour, Chair of the Board of Trustees of Severn Arts, Andrew Lane, Managing Director of Dynamics Medway, Carolyn Baxendale, the Head of the Bolton Music Service, and Michael Summers, Manager of Music Education at the Durham Music Service. Thank you. You're all very welcome and grateful for you coming to give us evidence today. Can I just start with an open question for all the panel? Overall, what are your views on the changes to music hubs and the music hubs investment programme? Who would like to start on that? Sure. John?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I first of all start by just thanking the committee for giving your time to this subject which matters a great deal to us and my colleagues, that you have many other subjects to think about too, so we appreciate the opportunity very much to answer your questions on this. And I've been asked to say thank you on behalf of my colleagues on this panel and the next.
Thank you.
In answer to your very broad question, I would open by saying that if it wasn't for if you believe that sort of core mission of Music Hub personnel is to try and grow numbers, improve standards, and raise more money for the cause, then I'm sorry to say that the experiences of the last 18 months, and the amount of time that has been taken up on going through all this, means that we would actually have been further forward now if we hadn't had to go through all that. And that's not a terribly good start for a funding programme. And what many of my colleagues believe is that the implementation of this programme is acting against its own ambitions. It takes too long. There is, when we started with all this, there was, as you know, the intention to completely shake up the whole system and start again. I remember writing to Sir Nicholas Narota already in February of last year, saying that as a professional funder, which is what I am, that's where I'm coming from, I've planned and created programmes for the Arts Council and for the lottery and for private foundations, so I kind of think I can see a badly constructed funding programme when I see one. And I'm afraid that's what I tried to say, and that I thought the Arts Council personnel were biting off more than they could chew. The whole thing was being thrown up in the air, and you don't do that if you aren't extremely clear as to what benefits you think you want to get from this. And that has never been clear to anybody, I think. You don't. There's a whole set of things that I might talk about. There was a lot of rhetoric about partnership working, and yet there were hundreds of pages of guidance that everybody had to plough through. And there were things like, for example, buried in, I think it was page 33 of an 80-page guidance document, you were suddenly told that the support for teachers' pensions, teachers' pension was to be summarily withdrawn. This had enormous human and financial consequences to some hubs, and you don't just bury that in the middle of your guidance document. You don't take 6 months to announce awards to 35-odd hub lead organisations, which happened last week. The deadline was in September. It took 6 months to do this. And this was for about 35, I believe, uncontested bids, where the money had already been agreed before they even start. And finally, I would say you don't give the architects of the plan the responsibility for monitoring its failure or progress, with all due respect to the personnel who are involved in that. If I was running this or any other professional funders, I think with the exception of this, you engage independents to do this with fresh eyes and fresh thoughts, especially when you are dealing with a plan which has very wide ambitions, but a funding programme behind it which is completely unable to meet those expectations.
Okay, a strong charge sheet there, and I think in terms of, we'll come back to some of the more detail about the funding and issues like TPS later on in the session, but I'm grateful for that introduction and I think a broad view. Who would like to go next? Andrew?
I'd just like to kind and have raised particularly the issues, the risks involved in areas where particularly there have been competitive bids. So I'm from Medway Music Hub, and sadly at this point the delivery of Music Hub activity in Medway is at enormous risk. The new Medway and Kent hub was bid for competitively by both current hub leads, and as yet, Dynamics, as the unsuccessful bidder, has only actually received one communication from the new HLO, which purely relates to requests of data, financial and operational information, but no indication at all that they're actually seeking to work in any partnership. We've had no reply to our proposal for an equitable partnership, which reflects the Arts Council's often stated aim of locally nuanced provision. As background, Medway has been consistently ranked by Arts Council among the very best in the country across a number of their key performance indicators, according to the Arts Council data that's been collected for the last 11 years, with our highly inclusive and accessible provision. In particular, the breadth and the extent of that provision. For example, pupil participation at whole class ensemble tuition is almost 2.5 times the national average, with participation in progression opportunities and in small groups and large groups also higher than the national average. We teach well in excess of 18,000 pupils across our various weekly programmes each year, made possible by a number of fully funded and subsidised programmes in schools, starting in early years Key Stage 1, with a focus at Key Stage 2 on whole class, and also small group progression opportunities and funded projects in secondary schools too. All of this provision is bespoke, and it's supported with free instrument loan in Medway, and the feedback from schools and those participation rates are absolutely outstanding. And in terms of how our national picture is very rosy in terms of how Medway ranks, it's also very incredibly favourable compared to our neighbour Kent, who are the successful bidder. For example, in 4 out of the last 6 years of the available hub data, as of last Friday, there was some new data published yesterday afternoon, Medway actually taught more pupils in 4 out of the last 6 years across its individual, small group, large group and whole class tuition than Kent did. And that in spite of the fact that Kent is 5 times the size of Medway. Medway also outperforms Kent in the vast majority of data points presented by Arts Council in their data dashboard, including school engagement. We present this data to demonstrate that with no potential partnership at all, so close to September and the start of the new funding agreements, the risk to the significant levelling down of provision in Medway is stark, which is a view shared by our partners, including Medway Council and our schools, teachers and the Medway community, and demonstrated by the strong campaign against Arts Council proposals made during the consultation phase. 460 objections were raised to the proposed Kent and Medway geography in the Arts Council survey out of 544 responses, which was preceded by over 120 letters to local MPs a few months prior, and all of this in the context of incredibly short timescales for responses. However, this has been totally ignored in terms of impact by the DfE and by ACE. We do have a recommendation to alleviate this risk in Medway. We go back to the fact that there's been no evidence presented by Arts Council or DfE to explain the rationale for the changes to 43 hubs, and a dismissal of a number of majority opinions expressed in the consultations. So we risk drifting into a situation where no hubs I'm aware of would actually have chosen, which has no evidence of being any more effective than the current structure. So a national pause is an option, as supported by ISM, who you'll hear for later, but we appreciate this may not be possible or desirable for many hubs, considering how far down the line we are in reorganisation for September, in which case our key recommendation to this committee is in areas where there were competitive bids, that the process of transition for this September is paused with a 1-year roll-on of the existing Arts Council funding agreements with the current hub lead organisations for next academic year, with a view to a negotiated transition supported by Arts Council to resolve issues and enable new contracts to begin in September 25. Because where current HLOs bid against one another, there's been no groundwork laid or preparations made during that bidding process, so a September 24 start to new contracts in this context presents an enormous risk to the existing provision for children and young people. We are aware of approximately 6 areas facing similar challenges to Medway where this could be effective.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will certainly bear that in mind. And can I come to Carolyn?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. So I agree with my colleagues so far in that we've had a year of uncertainty, and hub lead organisations have been really asking 3 questions. Will they continue to be a hub lead organisation in September? If not, will they be invited to be a partner in the new hub? And if they are invited to be a partner, how much funding will they get? So those three questions have created that element of uncertainty. We've now got a roadmap for September, and I feel that there are some key benefits in the regional hubs. So we're kind of over the milestone now, and if we can grasp and embrace the collaboration opportunities, I think there are some good things that can come out of this reorganisation, provided that the large regional hubs are grown from the grassroots upwards. In my mind, it's very important to recognise that all the local areas need local leadership, need a local response. There is a risk in this new landscape that we will end up with a series of top-down models which will not serve young people, will not serve schools. But I believe, and I've experienced this in the last 12 years in Greater Manchester, that you can have the best of both worlds. If the collaboration is strong, if people are willing to work in partnership, you can have really strong local services with a very clear regional strategy and ambitious programme. And working together, that seems to be the best outcome for all stakeholders.
Do you feel those relationships are in place for you to be able to do that with the other hubs in your area?
They absolutely are in our area. And you may know that previously we had two hubs in our area, the Greater Manchester hub and the Central Manchester hub. And through this process, we came to a consensus before the application process that we were all going to work together. So unlike in Medway and Kent, it has worked very well for us, and we are looking forward to the future now with new opportunities in mind. So it's been a positive experience for us, and some of the key practical benefits of working together is that all the partners in the hub area can align themselves with one ambition. There is a shared goal, but provided we all have local flexibility. And that's to do with the hub lead organisation not dictating but facilitating. It's really important that we don't go for a quick fix here, and that the Arts Council don't present us with a lot of tick boxes, and then we have a model that is top down. There's
an important balance to strike there between tick boxes and KPIs, but also having a clear vision of what you want to achieve. And I think coming back to John's point, if the aim is to bring more funds in, to get more children involved, and to provide more music, those things are what we'd all want music hubs to be focusing on, rather than bureaucracy.
I think what I'd like to ask the Arts Council is, particularly with the new regional hubs, to give them time and space to actually evolve these partnerships so that they can develop trust. They need to develop frameworks for sharing, because it is about sharing and not working in your silo. But that really does take time, and I would like to see the Arts Council perhaps being more vocal about how they are going to support the new regional hubs.
Okay, thank you. Michael, can I bring you in?
Thank you. And firstly, on behalf of the sector, we thank the DfE and Arts Council for the funding. I think it's very welcome and we appreciate it. However, I would say it's not enough. Unfortunately, it hasn't raised with inflation since we started. So actually, from Durham and Darke in itself, over the last 9 years, we've lost in the region of 1.125 million, which would have been had the funding been aligned with inflation. That equates to about £300,000 this year. So those challenges mean that I'm having to either increase costs to parents or to schools. Had my staffing structure remained the same, it would have cost me an extra £400,000 than that 9 years ago. Obviously, I've had to adapt my staffing, to reduce staffing, so therefore that is impacting on what we can actually do. And what we're being asked in this new plan, whilst I think we'd all agree that the aspirations of the national plan is fantastic. We don't think anyone would disagree with any of the aspirations of the national plan. We're being asked to do more for effectively less money. The age range has increased, including early years. We're having, with our larger hubs, we're joining a consortium across the North East. That's going to cost some additional administration fee that we're going to have to absorb in the revenue grant. We're going to have to look at engaging in lead schools and paying for that. So whilst the aspiration's fantastic, the funding isn't sufficient to continue the work that we're currently doing, let alone funding into the new plan.
Audiences. And just in terms of the regional dynamic, being able to work with those, Are there good working arrangements in place with the other hubs with which you're working now? Or?
I think we're very fortunate that we've always worked together as a region prior to this process. We've always worked collaboratively anyway and shared best practice. I think there is a feeling that it's kind of been ordained rather than an organic process. And I'm yet to see the actual data to demonstrate that us as the North East joined together will have either a better impact for the young people or better use of public funds. Mm-hmm. The actual data that we've seen is the opposite to that. I was involved with the focus groups of the 139 people that were there. 36 were by music hubs, everything else was the wider sector, and they all agreed that a more local and a greater number of music hubs would be more effective for the young people.
The department has said that more and better strategic collaboration across larger areas will improve the quality, breadth and consistency of music education. Do you agree with that statement, or by the sound of things not?
I think it's very hard because you want to disagree with the statement, but we haven't seen the data to support it. So I think it's very hard. So when I'm explaining to my schools, to the young people, the pupils, why we're joining this larger consortium, it's effectively because we've been told to do it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the case across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carolyn.
Could I just pick up Mike's point about funding? The related issue for me is the workforce. Mm-hmm. If this has got to be an outcomes programme. There is no point in going forward if this isn't about better outcomes for young people. And better outcomes for young people means retaining a high quality workforce, but the problem is that's increasingly expensive. And as Mike said, what hubs have been doing over the last few years is either reducing their staff, offering them less favourable terms and conditions, or giving more work to the same people. And that doesn't serve best the needs of young people. In Greater Manchester, we've increased our income targets in general to maintain our staffing levels. Exactly. And broadly speaking, we've managed to do that, but it's become increasingly challenging with the economic situation to generate enough additional income over and above the grant to maintain really good quality terms and conditions for the workforce. So if there is anything that DFE can do to encourage, support music hubs to maintain a high quality workforce, I would welcome that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to bring in Flick.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think we've talked about the selection process. So can I just, a colleague's going to, Jen, I think is going to talk to John and Carolyn, but can I just talk to you, Andrew and Michael, about what the implications are for not getting that lead hub? I think, Andrew, you sort of mentioned that there's been no communication at all. So perhaps you just elaborate on that, and then Michael, I just want to hear how you feel that you're going to be fitting in.
Yes, I suppose, I've stated quite plainly the sense that in Medway the fact that we haven't got the HLO status is an enormous risk to the provision in Medway, because so far there has been no sense of partnership at all throughout the process. Arts Council have talked about there may be fewer hub lead organisations, but there shouldn't necessarily be fewer delivery partners, delivery organisations. As it stands, and we are at the end of May, we're looking ahead to September, and obviously schools are off at the end of July. So in terms of making plans for September, we are currently in a situation where we have no idea what the provision can possibly be for those children in Medway. We have no idea where the dynamics as the lead organisation for the last 11 years, which is sort of a continuation of the structure of work before that, for the previous 10 years, whether we will have any opportunity to deliver that at all in the way that it's being done now. In Medway, we have an incredible entitlement to music education. It's been enormously successful for the last 11 years, and to be frank, the comparisons across the border would suggest that the provision could fall off a cliff. We could be heading into a really dangerous situation in terms of what the children and young people actually receive and what schools support the schools receive. So I'm afraid in our experience, the fact that we are no longer an HLO is causing is a huge risk to the provision in our area, for sure. Yes. Is
that because of the financial implications more, or do you think that they're going to ask for a restructuring of what you do?
In terms of financial implications, we certainly agree with colleagues that the fact that there's been static funding, and we're now in a situation where we're looking at the national plan, which has again been very well received. The amount of funding provided is the same, and yet the responsibilities are greater. The bureaucracy is greater in terms of the reporting, etc. So there's ever-increasing demands on the time of hub lead organisations, as well as, of course, the fact there's 895,000 more children in schools over the last decade. So financially, I think every hub has had to make changes and adjustments and evolutions over the last 10 years, and every hub has dealt with it differently. We have a different structure in Medway to across the border in Kent, to other colleagues along this table. So we have managed to sort of manage that change of finances without so far any risk to the provision of children in Medway. How long that can go on for, I suppose it will always depend on the evolution. With the increased expectations on hubs, it will be difficult to see how that can be continually expanded. We're always looking for a maintenance. We have such a high level of participation in Medway that we've been delighted to be able to keep that going so far. But where we are now, there is no financial offer, no partnership offer at all on the table for Dynamics to continue its work in Medway, which is incredibly efficient in terms of value for money. I can't see how that could carry on in the next phase unless there was an appropriate agreement in place. And also just to note that even in areas where there's been excellent partnership, good relationships, where the transition to multi-area hubs is smoother, we're still talking about top slicing of the grant. 3 to 5% seems to be fairly standard. And actually, talking to colleagues, some are budgeting for almost a 10% reduction, sort of 10% drop in their budgets, because once you take into account all the other considerations around bringing these hub structures together, all the new meetings and things that have to be put together, you're almost accounting for maybe 10% of the budget of the hub revenue grant that needs to be spent purely on the new HLO structure. And in a time when there are increased responsibilities, then also the idea that larger hubs can be more efficient, more effective, I think that's highly questionable, considering just straight away the amount of budget that's going to go just to provide this extra layer of bureaucracy.
And Michael, is that going to be the same for you in Durham? Or?
To an extent, I mean, we're fortunate in that across the North East we've formed a consortium. So actually we're part of a consortium bid with North Tyneside Council being the lead partner. But even that, in terms of Arts Council allowing a consortium bid but having a lead partner, seems a slight conflict in terms of language. But we're working very well together, and I do think in that respect it will be successful. But I would echo Andrew's points around actually just the additional cost that's taken. I think I was doing some sums around that. I mean, we've met at least monthly for the last 18 months, the 7 of us as hub leads. So obviously that's a huge amount of time and money. And I would suspect it's about a day a week of work at the moment, not on the coalface, not actually responding to the needs of young people, but putting governance and management structures in place to facilitate this new hub.
And for very little change.
For very little change, there will be, there will be some ideas. We've already set sharing some CPD across the area. There will be additional progression routes, but also with such a vast area, with actually some challenging transport links, there's no way that an ensemble that I offer in Darlington, our big band, that a pupil in Northumberland can access. Yeah. It's not physically possible. So I think this sort of, we can share best practice. But my other worry in the plan is actually there's no real talk of pedagogy. There's no real focus on actually what the needs of the young people are and developing teaching and learning for them. At the moment, we're spending a lot of time talking about governance and talking about management. And what we're measured on is output rather than outcomes. And I believe if we had more of a focus actually on the delivery and what good music education looks like, then the entire sector, we've got something to aim for, and actually we will have better outcomes for those young people that we're serving. But at the moment, a lot of time is spent in the bureaucracy of the process.
Did you have any input into how it was organised in this new structure at all? Was it all being top down?
No, we did totally. So we were, it was completely equal partnership. So all 7 of us as local authorities, 8 if you include Darlington, the only representative representing 2 local authorities. But we all, as 7 local authorities, completely involved, and also with discussion obviously with the newly combined authority that's just being established in the North East as well. So I would say that we've been we personally have been completely.
But did the selection process allow everybody to feed into what it would, an ideal music hub service would look like across the country, or was it just placed on you? I think that's what I'm trying to ask.
Well, the consortium came together, and therefore there was one bid, wasn't there, really, by the whole...
I'm talking about across the country.
In terms of the structure.
In terms of the structure of the selection.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the structure, no, we had no say in.
No say. Okay.
We had no say in. And again, as I said earlier, it was actually against what focus groups said, what the Andrew of Spain report that was published by Arts Council in August 2022 about what good hub partnerships should look like, and both of those suggested different models to what we find ourselves with. So it's going back to my point, we're yet to see the data to actually support what these greater hubs are. I think there's also some conflict in terms of the new geographies. Now, as Durham and Darlington, we're still a large hub as it stands. So there's a talk of it being a consistent across the region, across the country. But there are two new hubs that are three new hubs that are smaller in terms of number of schools, and two new hubs, one of which is a neighbour, that is smaller in number of pupils and number of revenue than we are now. So this idea of consistency, there's 13 new hubs that cover two local authorities as we currently do.
Yeah.
So I can't see where that consistency. I think the final point around the geographies is we were also told that it would improve the quality of provision, but we haven't actually been told A, what good provision looks like, and B, where the provision previously had been benchmarked and not been successful.
And to Andrew's point, there is data in terms of the Arts Council's data hub that shows what hubs were achieving.
I mean, the thing is, going back to Michael's point about the North East, I mean, the contention, if there was contention at all, was about the geography of the proposed area that was going to be covered by the new process. But once it became clear and determined that that was the geography, the local authorities very quickly came together to form that consortium in order to get a successful bid.
Was that your experience as well, John? Was that was, you know...
In our experience, we were teamed up with Herefordshire and Shropshire. Shropshire couldn't bear the thought of being with us, and we weren't terribly keen on that either. The reason being that they're perfectly good music service, but they are a local authority service. We are Severn Arts is an independent charity with PAYE staff. We employ staff on employment contracts, whereas the Herefordshire hub, they don't have any employment contracts at all and operate very differently. So one was attempting to put together three very, very different entities.
Different operating models.
And thankfully, we managed to appeal, and a different arrangement came about. But that took time as well. And the same kind of thing was going on in some other areas. You know, people scrambled to
okay, that's useful to understand. Bring in Jen. Thank you.
It very nicely comes on to my question, which was to John and Carolyn. Your organisations have obviously been selected to be the hub lead organisations for the new hubs from September. Do you consider this to be an appropriate time frame, and what communication have you had regarding the next steps in the process? You kind of touched on it both a little in your opening remarks, but if you could give us a little bit more detail.
Yes, I think it is an appropriate time frame for us in Greater Manchester, and the reason for that is because we've been working in this way since 2012. When we first put a multi-authority hub together in 2012, we had a fairly light touch compliance framework from the Arts Council, and to be honest, we could try out new things, we could find our way, we were trying something new, there was a sense of excitement about doing something that hadn't been done before, but it didn't happen in 6 months, it didn't happen in 12 months, and the maturity of those partnerships has taken time. And so I think what I'm saying, everybody across the country isn't at the same point. And so that's for Arts Council to look very carefully now and try to perhaps be a bit more bespoke about the support they're giving to some regional hubs who are starting off those partnerships for the first time. And just to go back to the point about whether regional hubs actually work, I've seen a large number of benefits, and I go back to the point about the best of both worlds. If you are working together across a region, there are things you can do that you couldn't do when you were working in your silos in your local authorities. You can assess the CPD needs of the region and be more targeted about where you're providing CPD. And I'm not saying let's do CPD in one particular area and everybody come to that course. I'm talking about identifying the needs, because we're bringing practitioners together from a number of local authorities and we understand what the needs are of the region. The other things you can do as a region is provide additional opportunities for children that didn't exist before. We have found that the children that are playing in the Bury music ensembles don't want to travel to Stockport and vice versa. They don't want to do that. But as a group of local leaders in music education, we've been able to create a Greater Manchester tier of ensembles that our more advanced children can access, and it gives them something ambitious to aim for, it gives them a challenge, and they get to work with people and organisations that they would never access if they were just working in their locality. So we have created new pathways for children in our region, but again, that didn't happen instantly. It took
10 years in the making.
Yeah. Yes, but I think the opportunities are there. And I think people have to see the potential in collaboration.
Can I ask you two of you, do you think it's actually more favours sort of city hubs or city regions rather than sort of more rural regions like we have in Northamptonshire? Has there been a difference in the kind of like geography?
I think that's very difficult for me to say because I've been head of Bolton Music Service since 2008. And we've grown our service over a long period of time and taken on the new opportunities. So I've always worked in Greater Manchester. And I agree that we are quite a dense area from that point of view. And I can travel to see my colleagues in Tameside and it takes me half an hour. I guess there are other issues in the Shire counties which would be problematic, but they need a different set of solutions.
I think you're probably getting a message from some of us that there's a long widespread feeling that if it ain't broke, then don't try and fix it, and certainly not this way. And it's not finished yet. A well-meaning person congratulated me on the success of Severn Arts in getting HLO status. And I said, trying to be as gracious as I could, that I didn't really want to be congratulated, I want to be thanked. Staff up and down the country have worked enormous hours, meeting ridiculous deadlines, having to plough through enormous amounts of paperwork. Many experienced managers have told me that the last 18 months have been the most torrid times in their entire arts career. And there's sight has been lost of a fundamental truth, which is that the funder needs the funded just as much as the other way round. And that's why I'm so keen on trying to adjust the relationships so that there is a more even understanding between both sides, as it were. Actually, I feel sorry, if I may say so, for a lot of the Arts Council staff too. Having managed grants-making staff myself, there's nothing worse than having to present a badly constructed programme with conditions in it that haven't really been quite thought through to an increasingly irascible clientele. It's not a very comfortable thing to be doing. And things haven't finished yet. There's at least £100 or more pages of guidance as to what we have to go through before the grants are confirmed. Apparently there are 6 stages of where you have to request the money over the next year, 6 payment moments, which take up a great deal of staff time and data collection and all the ancillary stuff that goes with it. And I think for me, it was when the chief executive of Severn Arts said that she'd been ticked off for not including an agenda in one of our annual returns, and that this would affect our risk rating. I think that's when I kind of had enough, because there's quite a lot in the material about risk ratings, but almost none of it is going to imperil the opportunities for children to learn music or any of that.
So finally, a little supplementary to this one is what measures need to be taken to ensure that the programme is a success? But I realise that's probably a really wide question, and I'm conscious about time.
One thing from each of the panel would be helpful.
Yeah. I've said it in my written evidence as well. I would embark on I'm going to say 2 things. Benchmarking. We have to benchmark. There is no information as to what the level of proficiency and attainment and so on among young people in this country, and therefore we don't know what we're aiming for. And this programme said from the outset, you must have targets so you know what it is you're spending the money on. Secondly, if I may allow to, I would ask for an exercise to reduce the compliance requirements by at least 50%. I used to work for a lottery boss. Compliance requirements tend to accrue over time in funding organisations, especially when you get staff coming in who are nervous and so on. So the answer, when you're not have a very good relationship with the funder, is just to add more compliance onto it and the process. That's what people do. And I had a wonderful boss who embarked every few years on what he called barnacle scraping. It had gone too much, and we needed to do so. And I would urge, maybe under the chairmanship of the minister, sit down and persuade ourselves that we do not need all this stuff. And the Treasury is not going to, we're not going to run away with the money, I can assure you.
I'd like to finish by celebrating the fact that we have a national plan for music education, and I'd like to pay tribute to all the colleagues that worked on the first national plan, the second national plan, and also the model music curriculum. In my experience, these documents are making a difference in our local schools. We have head teachers now that really do value music and want to work with our music hub, despite the sometimes gloomy messages that we hear in the media about music education in schools. I think it's still a mixed picture across the country. So I'd like to celebrate that, to say those documents are helping music hubs to fight the music fight and to work with schools. And just finally, the plan is very ambitious, rightly so, for all children, but the level of funding only allows us to deliver part of it.
And that picks up to Jess's question.
The level of funding, is it enough? You've already pointed out the issue about inflation, which I'm sure everybody who works on any public sector contract would currently say the same. But is the level of funding enough for the ambition?
No, it doesn't meet the ambition of the plan, but music hubs are expected, as part of their terms and conditions, to generate additional investment. And actually that's always been the case. Music hubs generally, in my experience, are very good at that. It's part of their DNA. But the difficulty now, from parents, from schools, from trusts and foundations, from local supporters.
Trusts and foundations, I also spent my entire life filling in applications. I once did one with school nurses when we decided that would be competitive tendering, and we worked out in the time for filling the documents we could have inoculated half of Africa with the nurses in my office. It's a waste of time, but is that funding? How can, if you're a local authority, like North Tyneside local authority, they can't apply for trusts and grants?
No, so quite a few music hubs have set up separate charities. We've set up one in Bolton called Trust Music, and it generates about £30,000 a year as a bursary fund for children. That's run out this year. So children who can't afford to pay for lessons can access a bursary through our partner charity. But we can also raise money through other routes to support children on free school meals who need remissions. But all of that additional income is now an expected part of our business, and it's difficult to predict year on year.
So has there been any extra funding for the music hubs within what you were already doing with regard to the job of a fundraiser and or the bureaucracy that you're currently having?
No, I think the music hub funding has stayed static, and I would ask for at least a look to increase it alongside inflation or in line with inflation, but that hasn't happened.
The problem with that model is that the capacity in a particular geographical area to raise funding from it to local community will be very, very different in different places.
Yeah.
I think
Might have been what Michael was about to say, but yes, come on.
Yeah, no, I would echo that point, and I think we need to sort of pay tribute to the sector as well about how entrepreneurial we are. You know, we run things like office choirs. We run a vocal festival that bring additional funding, and that's just a little bit. We also have a charitable arm, but that takes a lot of time to establish as well. And I think all the time, so you know, we're all doing things to make sure we can actually ultimately deliver for the young people in our area. But actually, what's published is it's this grant that's doing that. I would argue it's not. It's actually down to the sector and down to the hard work and diligence of people working a huge amount of hours to make sure that those young people can access fantastic provision.
I wouldn't expect yourselves to have it, but I wonder if there is an understanding of there'll be a monitoring system of how the 43, and by the way, there are 43 police forces in the country. I think that's the reason. Literally, they've picked the number 43. I mean, I can't come up with a better reason. Will there be, to Ian's point, like some way of knowing how much each one has raised to look at the regional disparities for funding going forward, and any idea that the DFE or ACE will pick up on that?
Yes, well, ACE do monitor that because they don't just monitor the spend of the grant.
Yeah.
They monitor the total outturn for the HLO and its partners.
Okay.
Including the additional income that's
We'll
generated.
be able to see if basically
Yes.
London gets loads more than everyone else.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think very briefly, back to the point about rurality, and also back to the rurality in areas where, such as Durham and Northumberland, there's very sparse population. That costs far more to deliver there, and actually because the model is based on the funding model is based on pupil numbers. So a small school that has 20 pupils in the Dales and Durham doesn't get as much money as a larger school, so they're instantly at a disadvantage, and we have to subsidise that through other ways.
And just as well, just a point on the view on the capital grant available for musical instruments and equipment. Are there any changes needed to that specific part of it? Yeah.
How long have you got?
I think firstly, it's incredibly welcome as a sector. You know, that our instrument stocks have been hammered, for want of a better word, for many years. So to get that money in is great news. I think there's some challenges in the administration of that we can't actually pay for the administration of those instruments. So just things like putting asset tags on and actually putting them out in schools, that has to come from our revenue grant. We can't use that in the capital grant. We've got to buy brand new instruments. That we can start to buy second-hand instruments, but only if the provider's actually on a portal. So I can't go onto eBay or Facebook Marketplace and buy cheap instruments. So it feels very unsustainable, and it feels like a couple of large instrument providers will make a lot of money from this. And the final thing for me is we can't pay for repairs. We've got to buy brand new instruments. Now, each year we've invested about £12,000 annually in repairing our current instrument stocks to make them ready, but we still have other instruments that need to be repaired. Yeah. And my final point, is that the SEND, for special adaptive instruments for pupils. Yeah. Now, very often what we do is we'll go into a school and we'll look at the child, we'll speak to the child, and we'll make the adaptive instrument. I've got a fantastic instrument repair that can do that, and we'll make the adaptive instrument for that pupil. Now, that takes obviously time and materials, but in terms of the capital grant, all I can do is buy a set adaptive instrument for that pupil that might actually not be responding to that pupil's needs.
Michael, did you mean repaired or serviced?
Yes.
Thank you.
We have 7,000 instruments. I have to say, we don't need 300,000 that we're about to be given. You're not supposed to say that in the public sector, but...
I was going to say, are you going to have excess in your capital?
But can I counter that? And we do need them.
What we do is repair them, and it's very difficult for us to keep... But we're not allowed to use it. It's been flatly refused.
And any rationale given for that?
It's very... I think maybe some members of the following panel may know more about this.
Okay.
Than
we will come back to a question, but thank you. Can I bring in Ian, finally?
Yes. I'm looking at the nice colourful map of the geography of some of these areas, and some of them do make sense, and some of them not so much. But, you know, but somebody's made a decision somewhere about that's the way they should be. But we have heard some concerns about the impact that the changes to the teachers' pension scheme may have on music hubs and the staff that they employ. So have any of you been affected by this, and if so, how?
John, you want to come first?
Not directly, because we're a local authority hub, and obviously it's more for an independent trust, so I think it's probably better speaking to our colleagues in the second panel who have probably a better national view from my perspective.
Yes. I mean, Severn Arts is affected by this, and we have had to go through ghastly, and we hated having to do it, but I mean, we've had to, consultations and everything that goes with it in order to protect the company.
Right. Thank you.
It was about a £300,000 hit.
Carolyn?
Yes, well, we've got a lot of local area partners in our hub, and some of them are local authority organisations and some of them are independent companies. And the independent music services are now finding it very difficult because they don't know about the teachers' pension scheme support. So it's very welcome that centrally employed teachers are now being supported with the teachers' pensions uplift, but I think we're still waiting to understand whether other organisations will be supported or not.
It essentially creates a greater imbalance between
Yes.
the independent organisations.
And if music hubs are about consistency, which they absolutely should be for young people, then we need a consistent approach to the teachers' pension support across music hubs, in my view.
I'd just say on top of that, would you recognise a statement that it's particularly unfair if this ends up with independent providers not having their teacher pension scheme contributions covered, given that governments successively have encouraged people to take on that model?
That's how it would play out in our hub, because some of our organisations wouldn't get that support and some of them would.
Okay, well, I'm very grateful to our first panel. We have overrun, but I think it's very important that we heard from you, and thank you for the enormous amount of work that you have been doing, and I think everyone working in this process for navigating the process that you've been through. I think you've given us plenty of questions for our subsequent two panels, so thank you. And I will ask the second panel to come up, please.
The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended.
Executive of Music, Mark, welcome. Stuart, Darke, the Director of Legal Services at the Independent Society for Musicians, and Chris Walters, the National Organiser, Education, Health and Wellbeing for the Musicians Union. Thank you very much for coming to give us evidence today. What are your views on the plans to reduce the numbers of music hubs, and what impact do you feel that these will have on the provision of music education? Who would like to start on that? Bridget, please.
Okay. Well, I welcome the ambition of the new plan. Thank you for having us to speak today. And I welcome the ambition of the new plan. It was no secret that I was critical of the first plan, despite being involved in that and the model and the music manifesto prior to that, because it didn't really hit with schools. Plan 1. They didn't even know it existed, and it also talked about every child having the opportunity to learn a musical instrument, but didn't really talk about how to go from that and to progress. Both those have been addressed. Half the plan writes about the school and the role of the school, and there is more concentration on recognising the importance of progression. The other thing that's changed, because the Department for Education has changed, is that we now look at 0 to 25. And that's fantastic. Music learning doesn't start at 5. It should start as soon as possible, ideally pre-birth. And music education doesn't stop. No, singing to your baby in the womb is really powerful. And we should carry on into higher and further education and supporting our industry of tomorrow. An industry that's worth billions and employs over 210,000 people. That's just the music industry, and I'm not sure it actually counts music teachers and professionals like ourselves. So it's a great plan and it has great ambition. However,
coming.
Yes, and we shouldn't really say but. So I was slightly surprised to see within the plan the talk of reducing the number of hub lead organisations. I say this all the time. My colleagues here will have heard me say it many, many times. A hub is a concept, not an organisation. It's a concept of partnership working. Partnerships are already happening in the music education hubs around the country. There are 114, and we've already reduced from 121 at the start in 2012. So I was slightly surprised when it said there would be fewer, and then we started to ask, well, what does that mean? How many fewer? The process to getting where we are now has been long and protracted, but has seemed rushed at times as well. And the idea of the prescribed geographies felt very rushed in terms of discussing how it would work. And using words that Carolyn's used regularly, prescribing rather than organic partnerships is difficult, and partnerships take time to build. So we've had a year of uncertainty, and I feel that there was a lot of consideration of whether this was about mergers and acquisitions. Mergers of music services, one music service rather than 4. Well, no, that's not what it was about. Acquisitions, taking on another school in a multi-academy trust, that's not what it's about either. It's about local partnerships and the local delivery network and how that works together. And I think some of our new geographies will be fantastic. They will fly. Others will need a lot more time to make it work, and they might not work. There was actually a partnership of 2 in London which started together and then split so that they worked separately as separate music hubs a few years ago. It can work and it sometimes doesn't. And as I said, we're now at 114, so we have made it work in some places to combine areas already.
But that's been done organically.
It just takes time, and it needs to be organically done.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that before I go into more detail?
Well, just I thought it might be useful just to highlight some of the things from the ISM's point of view as well on the restructure and the investment programme. We're very grateful that we've been able to come and speak to you all today, and we come at this position from as the ISM being a subject association for music, wants to see high quality music education for young people across the country. But I think we've been fairly vocal in our lack of support for the investment process and the way it's been run. In terms of, and we've questioned several times with the department around the lack of evidence that underpins the rationale for going from 120 odd hubs down to 43. It's interesting what you say about picking a number almost out of the air. I've got no idea we've got no idea what it aligns to, how it aligns to anything beyond being a number, somewhere between, somewhere approaching 40. A lack of evidence saying, well, what is the quality of education now and what needs to be addressed in the structures of the hub organisations in order to improve education if it is lacking anywhere. A real lack of evidence, and there's nothing to show, nothing we've been seen, and we've asked for it, around reducing the number of hub lead organisations will lead to higher quality support for schools in an area, for pupils in an area, for people in an area. Nothing to show how that will address any cold spots. Nothing around saying, well, why are the cold spots maybe in education? Is it about schools not being able to afford it, the time, the money in schools and what have you? And even the DfE's own rationale, if you can call it that, even there's a lack of evidence, we'd say, for that rationale not being met. The fact that there are still single local authority hubs within the structure. There are ones which line up with combined authorities. There are ones which don't line up with combined authorities. And that's because there has been an evolution over time with hubs developing partnerships. A real disparity in the number of pupil numbers amongst different hubs, and a real disparity amongst number of schools as well. So all of those things not lining up with what the DfE is saying the reason for it, and the DfE rationale being that the kind of management speak that you might expect from trying to justify something. So we've also then had concerns about the consultation and the short timeline in the consultation, the fact that you had focus groups back in January 2003, 10 focus groups, 10 days only for people to comment on a digital survey about the geographical areas. There was a March 2023 survey, but no real change then to the 43 hub lead organisations' geographical areas. So again, it made us question, well, has someone picked a number? And then that's the number that are going to be. Hubs only had 3 months to submit a bid after reading information which was available for the prior month to them. But then ACE got 6 months to evaluate all the bids as well. And then the short timeline from April, when successful hubs were told, publicly then in May, and the timeline then to put things in place for September this year. Real pressure on hubs and organisations that were already tasked with delivering music education to young people. And so they were doing all the things that they were meant to be doing, reporting to ACE, ticking those boxes, but they were also having to engage in that process. And so a real impact on cost as well. So you've heard from them.
Presumably an impact on musicians themselves. And Chris, do you want to
yes.
come in on terms of
Yeah, absolutely. I think Bridget's comment that some of these hubs will fly and others may not work is a very pertinent remark. There is a sense that this is not an organic restructure. It has been imposed, and there have been all sorts of different responses to it that we heard very well articulated in the first panel. Different responses, and we're going to see some big successes here, and we're going to see some huge struggles and problems. So I think the question for me is, why was this imposed? What was the rationale for it? The rationale that was given was in very open language, and it didn't evidence how this was going to lead to improved outcomes in music education for children and young people. I think going forward we see that this is going to continue to be a challenge because these larger hubs are going to have to rationalise within themselves. And that's going to take a long time. We've heard about communication. There are issues, I'm representing the teaching workforce in these hubs. There are going to be issues because there are such different teachers' pay and terms across the different organisations that make up the hubs. There are also details like the different organisations charging differently to schools and offering different services, and to what extent and how is that going to be rationalised, because whatever the guidance is, the stakeholders on the ground will need consistency to understand what is being offered by these hubs. We've talked about the funding issue. There has been standstill funding. I think for our sector organisations, we have observed that the funding that is linked to the National Plan for Music Education seems based more on affordability than on a costed assessment of what it would take to deliver the plan. We would like to see that, but if I could just bring it back to teachers, there has been a long change over decades in how visiting music teachers are engaged and how they operate. And that's because we have had this flat funding and there's been a real terms cut. And the organisations that engage the teachers, what were the music services and now the organisations that are forming these larger hubs, have struggled to make ends meet. And one of the ways they've responded to that has been to reduce and minimise teachers' pay and terms. And we now see great inconsistency around hubs in that area. And as Carolyn referred to, that doesn't lead to the best outcomes for children and young people. We've already heard that some people are going to get top up for teachers' pensions, others are on freelance contracts. The Arts Council data dashboard talks about half of the workforce being employed, but we don't know rates of pay, we don't know what type of employment contract. The other half are on freelance or zero-hour contracts. And there's a real question mark for me whether freelance is even an appropriate status for teachers that are delivering a structured, funded programme of education where there needs to be accountability, there needs to be control. So for us, to summarise, this process wasn't the issue that needed fixing with music education. There was such a lot of other stuff that we could have put our attention into. Collectively, the sector, policymakers, stakeholders, and yet it's been an enormous distraction. Hubs are run on a shoestring management, often one or two people, spending all their time on this bidding stuff, and there would have been a lot of other stuff that we could have looked at.
Thank you. It's a useful point. And just in terms of evidence, I mean, both Bridget and Stuart, you've talked about lack of evidence behind the sort of number. What evidence should the department gather now to ensure the success and measure the impact of the programme? Because we all want to be evidence-based, so our job as a select committee is to try and make sure they are. You talked about the variation in performance that we could see. What should be the key metrics that they should be looking at?
A key metric for me is engagement by schools in this. They are the role of schools in music education is vital It's where most children and young people go every day, and that is where they will receive a large proportion of their music education. Music Education Hubs, the partnership around it that makes up the Music Education Hub, provides support to schools, training for teachers and support for schools. They make the music department one of the largest departments in the school, potentially, by all the visiting music teachers that come in. But at the heart of it is the school music provision, and whether that's within the curriculum or co-curricular activity. And my colleagues, Music Mark represents, again, a subject association, and we represent all the Music Education Hub lead organisations and many of their partners. And they would say the biggest challenge is the plan is non-statutory. The model music curriculum is non-statutory. And without statutory expectations of all schools, then that core music offer cannot be then developed and increased by the Music Hub's activities. And that core offer is only available where a school sees the importance and value of music and teaching music. We particularly think of our secondary schools and the challenge we have in secondary schools where our academies and free schools can choose the curriculum that they study and measures, and I know that you will talk about this too, Stuart, is that the measures are not allowing for schools to choose music when it is a subject which can support much wider learning as well as the rigour of a subject in and of itself. And so we have a challenge, particularly in our secondary schools. Of course, we can't fix that challenge even if they were to become statutory. There aren't enough secondary school music teachers for the secondary schools we have in England. And
Brian, just quickly, and then Stuart.
Are there some schools that don't do like music GCSE, for example? I literally just had to go and wake my son up to make sure he went to his A level, by the way. There are some that don't do music GCSE at all.
No, there are some that don't do GCSE music at all.
There are lots.
Lots.
The number of students taking GCSE music is low now. It's and especially when you look at it as the percentage of the total cohort, it's been reducing over the past few years.
Is that potentially something that could be collected, like that data being collected, increasing?
But I mean, I think certainly when I was at the department, the argument was always that there were declining numbers taking music GCSE, but actually rising numbers taking grades and other elements of music education externally, partly because of the work of the music hubs. But is that...
There's been a rise in vocational alternatives to GCSE, but even accounting for that, the total trajectory is downwards. I mean, there's been a positive increase in variety of qualifications that are available, but we're not on an upward trajectory with engagement at music at Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, GCSE and equivalent, A-level and equivalent, and then on into university.
And that's having an impact on university roles. And we're seeing cuts to university music departments, which of course doesn't support the pathway to industry, which is part of the plan.
Part of the plan, which is... Stuart, you
want... I suppose it leads on to that what should change, I suppose, and you've heard this morning from people who fill in the returns to the Arts Council, it's about outputs, not outcomes. And so that may well be a change, but reporting on things like risk factors and that sort of thing, how does that go to the quality of education? And that's what needs... There's no benchmark in that at the moment. There is no saying, where are we at the moment? How do we improve? And have we improved? And has this process does having 43 hub lead organisations improve that process? And that's what's impossible to answer at the moment, because there is no benchmark about where we are at the moment. And so I suppose there's that fear a little bit as well from our perspective about hubs being set up to fail, as well as Bridget highlights, with the plan being non-statutory and hubs being graded, for want of a better word, or assessed on how much engagement there are in schools, but schools don't have to engage. And so if hubs then are admonished by Arts Council for not having high engagement, how are they going to increase engagement when schools don't have to? It's not the plan is non-statutory. But then coupled with that, it's more nuanced, I think, than that, because obviously there's a funding point as well. If you're going to make something statutory, you've got to back it up with the funds as well, at a school level, not just maybe at a hubs level as well.
Yeah. Okay, come to Jen.
Yes, that leads us nicely on to my question, which is what are your views on the adequacy of the funding available? Obviously, we've heard in the previous session it seems to be left wanting. What is the adequacy of the funding available to deliver the Music Hub investment? And Stuart, in fact, the Independent Society of Musicians has said that concerns about funding are so serious that the process should be paused to allow an investigation to take place. What type of investigations would you suggest to take place, and what changes would you hope to see as a result? So if we take Stuart first and then come back to him.
I think, and the pause was most definitely while the process was going on. We started talking about a pause, I think, back in September last year, before the bids had closed, because we were starting to see the problems building up with, as I've outlined. I suppose what we wanted an investigation into was the rationale and the evidence, or the lack of evidence, about why pick 43. Why have 43 hub lead organisations, especially when when surveyed, the sector said 43% of the sector said 87 hubs, and only 39% said 40 hubs was the figure, and even less said 10 hubs. So I think that was the investigation. I think that's what we're talking about investigating. We're talking about what is the quality of education, and how do you increase the quality? How do you make that quality better? How do you get a higher quality education, music education for young people? On the funding point, the funding, as you've heard this morning as well, the funding's not adequate to fulfil the requirements of the national plan. You've had static funding in effect since 2015-16, at a time when inflation has been rife, pupil numbers have gone up. You're talking about around about £9 per pupil, something like that, for the music education hubs. That's that's their funding. And when you compare it with other things, we often compare it with the money invested in sports and PE education, and the sports and PE premium was £320 million just in 2021-22. So the 380 million that has been spent, which I think Arts Council and the DFE quote over a 5-year period of 380 million on music hubs, is kind of dwarfed in 1 year by what's spent. Now, that's not to say that sports and PE shouldn't get that money, but that's just to demonstrate the inadequacy, in our view, of the funding for music hubs.
Can I come in there? Just to support comments that have been made, I would like to see a piece of work that looks at the ambitions of a national plan, which, as has been said, was well received by the sector, and if that national plan happened everywhere, we'd be in a really good position with music education. And to look at the gap between that and the funding that's available, and to be honest about how far we're falling short of that, or how far we're going to be falling short of that on the budget that we've got. And the previous question around, how are we measuring outcomes, how are we measuring good outcomes? I think one of the ways that we have to do that is social equity justice for people who can't afford music education, and whose experience as a children, young person from a less well-off background is going to be that taster bit of learning an instrument that will be funded on the funding that's available, and then the inability to continue on because there isn't the resource behind that child progressing, whereas another child whose parents can afford to subsidise their learning will be able to continue on. And over time, that leads to an inequality in who progresses on a musical instrument, who takes it into a career, and what the balance of the music industry looks like. So there's inequity there that we really risk if we don't have a closer look and a closer scrutiny of the chasm, well, maybe chasm's too harsh a word, big gap between what's funded and what's asked.
Bridget, you want to come in on that? I mean, surely within all this data that the Arts Council gather, there must be data on free school meals participation and continuity in that. Is that something that needs to be given more of a light? But Bridget,
I wanted to come in just to answer Chris's point about needing to cost the national plan. How much does it would actually cost to deliver the ambitions of the plan? Music Mark has just commissioned the independent think tank Demos to do just that. We should have answers which we can submit to the committee by the autumn. We believe it's going to be an eye-watering amount, but we would agree that at least inflation should come into play here. In fact, the ISM and Music Mark asked the government to increase the grant. In 2019, we asked them to increase it to 100 million, and that was not looking at inflation but recognising the ambition of the last plan and the need to cover costs. We've increased children and young people over the last 10 years by nearly 500,000. There are 9 million children in the school census this year, the last census that was quoted. Inflationary increase for the grant in 2012 would be 103.2 million by the Bank of England inflation calculator. And actually, the first year of music education hubs saw a drop in funding from 82 to 75. It then went down further until 2015 when it came back up again. Looking at the figures for the Department for Education's contribution, in 2012, 75 million, in 2022-23, 76. The inflation calculator would have said 103. But parents contributed 31.7 million in 2012. And in 2022-23 contributed 51.9 million pounds. So they paid that much for music education. And we do question whether that's part of this conversation about equitable access. Inflation would have had parents paying 43.6. So parents are paying above inflation. A colleague of mine who's a lecturer at a university told me that the tuition for their 2 children was the 4th highest monthly expenditure for them, following their mortgage, utility bills and food, at £250 a month. They're not sure they can maintain that cost. Parents are subsidising the music education for children and young people in this country. And the other incomes areas, and Carolyn is right, the challenge of raising the other income. Our colleagues have been so entrepreneurial, have worked so hard to raise funding from elsewhere, and actually the Arts Council themselves have supported significantly, and it's a real success story. The Arts Council themselves support music education more now, but local authority funding has dropped. School funding against inflation is dropping. Trusts and foundations getting harder to raise funding from. All these things are making it harder and harder for our colleagues to ensure an equitable access to a high-quality music education, and it's creating challenges with our workforce too.
Thank you. And bring in Vicky.
Thank you. I want to speak about the National Plan for Music Education and what you think is good and what you think is bad and what's left out. But before that, declaration of interest. I'm not a musician. I didn't do A-level music. I didn't do GCSE O-level music. I do have grade 8 in one subject, grade 7 in another subject. And when I think about my teenage years, music was core to my happiness and well-being. It's through playing in ensembles and bands that I learned about teamwork. It taught me to concentrate. It taught me to listen. And those are all those soft skills that we haven't even mentioned. So what's good about the national plan? What concerns do you have? And then I want to come on to talk about monitoring the outcomes, especially those softer outcomes.
What's good about the national plan? What's good is that it does focus on schools and schools' responsibility for music education, and that it talks about progression, not just first access, and it recognises that some children and young people may want to go into the profession, and that we should expect to have elite musicians as we have elite sportsmen and women. So I think there's some real strength to the national plan. It's a little long compared to the national plan in Wales. We now actually have 2 national plans in the UK. There is a national plan in Wales, which is very closely linked to the new curriculum in Wales. And I think that's the other thing that's strong about it. It links with previous government documents, such as the model music curriculum. But I think the problem is it's non-statutory, and it's ambitious without the funding behind it.
I would support those remarks. I think that in all of this, the national plan is not a problem. It's a very good document that describes a very coherent vision for music education. I think the problem is the rolling it out, the hub restructuring that we're talking about, the monitoring, the funding behind it, and is the ambition serious enough to make it statutory and to make it accountable in schools? And we would want it to be, because it's a good document that would benefit so many children and young people if it was consistently implemented. Teachers are out of scope on it. That's a concern for us. We've raised, and it's been alluded to, that there are great inconsistencies with how the workforce are managed, and a lot is asked of them, and some of them are on very precarious contracts indeed, but the national plan did not include them in its scope, and in fact we haven't really found anywhere where teachers are in scope. And I would really like to find a structured and formal way to introduce that issue into the conversation.
I think, like my colleagues, the plan has laudable aims and what it wants to do. I think it's part of as well as being non-statutory in nature, a concern and the funding, but it's also part of a wider ecosystem as well of school accountability. And the fact that accountability measures don't include subjects necessarily like music, so EBAC, Progress 8, those sorts of things. So it's part of a wider ecosystem as well. And I think that those things potentially, I think the ISM think those things potentially have to be looked at as well to sit alongside the hub, to sit alongside the music education plan as well.
Chris, when the plan was published 2 years ago, you said the proof and its value will be in the outcomes for children and young people, and it is vital these are monitored effectively. Between you, you've mentioned the need to monitor the number of schools that are involved. You've mentioned the want to monitor the number of children from more challenged backgrounds that are involved. What else should be being monitored? And how do we monitor some of those softer impacts that I mentioned, the impact on children's well-being, teamwork, communication skills that they get through music?
Those are really important questions, and one comment I would make is that the monitoring and evaluation of the hub programme in the last 10 years has tended to be around sort of participation numbers in different groups of children and young people. Where we've struggled and what hasn't been part of the data gathering is qualitative assessments of the educational outcomes. So I would like to move to a way that we look at the monitoring of this as how good are these outcomes and how well are the children benefiting from. And I think it was said in the previous panel that actually that we're struggling with that. It hasn't actually been stated what is a good outcome from this programme. What does that look like? So I'd like some work on defining that.
So for example, I know that playing an instrument by myself, okay, but your main benefit to me was when I started playing in ensembles, groups, singing in choirs, thinking back on it, and monitoring the numbers of those opportunities to sing in choirs, play in ensembles, be in a band, important, but it's the quality of that band, choir, etc. as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We do need to find a way to say, is this ensemble delivering a quality experience? And you could say, providing a return on the investment that we're putting into this.
Okay, so anything else you want to say about monitoring, any of you?
I believe that there's going to be an independent evaluation. I don't know whether DfE have got to in the process of appointing somebody, but I would hope that would be within scope for them to look at. Academics will have ways of monitoring outcomes rather than outputs.
I mean, none of you have said we should monitor the number of teachers, the number of peripatetic teachers, the number of instruments. Are there any trombone teachers in Durham? You know,
that work is happening on a local level in terms of making sure there are enough trombone teachers. But there is also...
Don't play the trombone.
I think some of that numerical data, that quantitative data, is being collected. I believe there is work going on behind the scenes with the Arts Council and the Department for Education to look at the data and the questions being asked to make sure that they are less up for interpretation. To talk about engagement with schools, what does engagement look like? So I think there is work to be done to not just look at numbers, but to look at the quality.
Well, if the end game is one day to win Eurovision, then we've got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
One.
Yes, I'm taking us back on funding and the sort of the nuts and bolts. So Chris, the Musicians' Union has expressed concerns about the impact of the changes on teachers' pay and conditions. Could you just briefly outline what these concerns are and how they should be resolved?
Yes, I think it's a fundamental shift that's taken place over a long time. It's not necessarily connected to this latest hub restructure. Right. It's an issue of flat standstill funding for a long time, which over time doesn't go as far and drives the people who are running hubs into a position where they're having to make difficult decisions. When I was learning an instrument, and that was in the 90s, we lived in a world where there were career instrumental teachers, peripatetic teachers, who were employed and had parity with other types of unattached teachers in the local authority and had parity with classroom teachers in terms of their status and professional standing. They weren't paid hourly only for contact time. They weren't on a freelance contract, dubious or otherwise. They were employed and it was their career and it progressed. And that was a state of affairs that could lead to greater oversight, more consistency, and hopefully better outcomes for children and young people.
It almost make me feel nostalgic for my time as chair of the Education Committee in Gateshead, but yeah. There we go. Not to worry.
The shift from that to where we are now is something that I tend to think has gone under the radar a bit and has not had a lot of political oversight, and ending up in a situation where visiting instrumental music teachers are treated in a way that's quite different from other teachers part of the funded education programme. My recommendation, the union's recommendation, would be to have a review. In Wales, the government is running a review of teachers' terms and conditions to bring these issues to light. It's not going to be easy to solve, but we do need to look at what are the right types of contracts for this kind of work and what's the right pay scale. And the Musicians' Union would say that we would recommend a national pay scale and a contract for visiting music teachers, because they're all basically doing the same work, and it doesn't make any sense to me really that there is this huge variety of different types of contracts and statuses that have been driven by affordability rather than genuine fit for the work that's being undertaken. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. Any observations on that?
Just to support what Chris has said, that precarious nature that an awful lot of ISM members and MU members feel around their employment as hourly paid music teachers. So the from one term to the next, hours differing, contracts not giving them employment rights, that sort of thing. So working on a freelance basis.
0 hours contracts reared their ugly head, have they?
About a third of the workforce.
Can I just add to that? Has there ever been a time when you've had, a violin teacher on full-time, contract or a contract like that? I mean, I've never heard of that before, because they've normally always been coming in for to do 4 or 5 hours a week or whatever.
My father was a peripatetic music teacher for most of his career, paid on teachers' pay and conditions because he was a qualified teacher and retired as a teacher in his late 60s, having taught clarinet.
How long ago was that then, just roughly?
Well, that is quite a long time ago, but there are still teachers in the profession who have
they do have
that, and many more in Scotland, where the music services are still within local authorities except one. The challenge, of course, is that whilst I would agree that we need to respect and value our workforce and give them the status that they deserve as part of the teaching profession. We do have many who come into the profession without teachers' qualifications, and whilst they are given great training and support by music services and other colleagues, may not have the qualification which would allow them to go on to a qualified teacher pay scale, but will be great teachers. And we need to be careful not to create a hierarchy which penalises those who are great teachers but don't have a qualification. And we also need to recognise, particularly with our younger our workforce that's coming into the young people that are coming into the workforce now, who want a portfolio career. They want to be able to play. They want to be able to do gigs, to do teaching, to do some community music work, and whatever it is. They want to create something that they would call a portfolio career. Challenging if to be given a freelance contract if they're going to be teaching on a specific day in a specific school and it's set for them, because that's not the terms of freelance. But we need to recognise that any teacher's terms and conditions has to accept that there will be some diversity of the teaching workforce still.
Very interesting point.
Just as an example, my own local authority had a peripatetic music service with employed teachers working directly for the local authority, and it was a good service. But cuts have seen the end of that, I'm afraid. You've all raised concerns about the impact of changes to the teachers' pension scheme on Music Hub finances, and in March an email was dispatched from the Minister stating that the Treasury had committed to providing funding for this. So have you received any further information on this or updates on this, and do you feel that your concerns have been addressed?
Where we're up to at the moment with this is that the top-up for teachers' pension scheme employers' contribution runs out in August. Right. So there's going to continue to be a top-up for the ones that are inside local authorities, or support for employers' contributions, not a top-up. There was a top-up for those that were outside of local authorities, and that's what's coming to an end. At the moment, let's say there's still ongoing conversations and we're engaging with officials on this, but we don't have anything tangible to suggest that there's a concrete plan for an extension. And that's a pity, because as John on the previous panel alluded to, the consultations to exit from the teachers' pension scheme are happening now. Right. So we're really up against it time-wise. Yeah. And if there is going to be any hope for a continuation of that support, then we need to be quick in order to give a pause to those consultations. And, do you
have any feel for the proportion of those non-local authority hubs which have already dropped out of the teachers' pension scheme?
There are... I would say there's about 3 or 4 that are already well on the way to finishing their consultations. There are others, a similar number, that have paused roughly, and then the others haven't acted yet and are hoping that something will happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there are about 1,100 teachers affected by this across 16 music service trusts. The other concern we have, as well as the music service trusts who are affected by this, is the local authorities, where the school census, which is being used to calculate how much the local authority will be given to support the 5% increase, not the full, but the specific 5% increase that came into being last month. That school census didn't require music services within local authorities to include some of the staff they have, sessional staff, and to talk about the staff who have other activities that they do beyond their core hours. And so the bill for some local authorities will be much larger than the amount that they will receive from the using the school census, because the school census wasn't expected to be being used to calculate this teachers' pension scheme support, because I think it was unexpected for everyone that it would be revalued and it would increase. And obviously the Department for Education are supporting schools, and they've had to work through the calculations to be able to support others. But we are concerned about local authorities just as much as our trusts.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, agree with the cynic in me a little bit says, is this a way of getting people to not have not be part of the teachers' pension scheme, to withdraw from the teachers' pension scheme, because as Chris says, it is ongoing at the moment. There are consultations ongoing at the moment, and once people are out, I don't envisage them going back in. That's what, even if then there was some support put in there, because they're not talking about as well, they're not talking about, and this is driven by funding, they're not talking about matching the employer contributions that have been made previously to teachers' pensions. So even before the 2019 increase, the 16% to 23%, they're talking about defined contribution pension schemes which are contributing 5-6% by the employer. There's then no incentive for the employer, even with support, given the funding levels, even with support from the DfE, to then say, actually, we'll go back into the teachers' pension scheme. So those people, I suppose my fear is that they lose that access forever. It's not that they'll go back in.
I mean, have any of you got any information on recruitment and retention as a result of this?
Not in that way. As Bridget says, and that they're happening at the moment. I think whether we'll see people leaving the profession because they can make better provision elsewhere, or even trying to move to local authorities, don't know. But that might be, the proof might be in the pudding.
Well, I mean, I think that's something that if any data does come to light, if people would let us know on that, I see one or two people nodding in the audience at the back, as it were. So
no, that would be useful.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've overrunning again slightly, and apologies to the Minister who's been waiting, but I will bring on the final panel. Thank you very much for the evidence you've given us today.
Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended.
Good to see you again. Final panel for this session are Right Honourable Damian Hinds, MP, Minister of State for Schools, and Jenny Oldroyd, Director for Curriculum and Qualifications at the Department for Education. Perhaps I can just start by asking you, Minister, to briefly outline the Department's aims and rationale for the reduction in the number of music hubs, and how you expect the programme to achieve that aim, those aims. We've heard a lot of challenge from the earlier sessions around the basis for that reduction. So perhaps you can give us the case for.
Well, I thought we might have started with our objectives for music, because I think we need to see everything in that context of what we're trying to do overall. But I'm sure we'll come on to that. We want to have a network of lead organisations at the right scale and the right scope to be able to most effectively support brilliant music education at schools throughout the country. Historically, we had a local authority areas type basis. We've actually, over time, there have been some mergers that have happened sort of organically, and we judged that this sort of unit scale that we're talking about is appropriate, and it follows. It's not unique. If you think about what's happened with academy trusts, for example, these things have changed. These things have changed over time. The way that sporting organisations organise themselves, you're trying to get a balance between being locally responsive and specific, but also large enough to get the economies of scale, to be able to leverage the partnerships, to be able to look at perhaps other additional funding opportunities, sponsorship opportunities, access centres of culture in a wider area, all those kinds of things. Jenny may wish to add.
I completely agree with those points. The other things I'd add is we've heard quite a bit over the morning about some of the funding challenges for hubs and some of the administration that hubs engage with. And we're conscious that there are economies of scale to doing some of that in larger areas. And that if you, there is no sort of set overhead, it's worth me saying, for the running of a hub lead organisation, but we think that some of those administrative roles might be easier if they're carried out over a wider area, and that actually came through in some of the research that was the independent research that was undertaken of hubs that already worked with more than one local authority area before the process of the two-stage process of consultation started on those geographical areas. There were some questions earlier from one of your members about the difference of hubs in rural areas versus urban areas, and I think it's worth saying that some of the advantages we think come through more for areas that don't have the kind of the cultural capital of an urban centre in their area, and we think that bigger geographical areas perhaps support equity in that sense. I recognise that the exact benefits will vary by area. So we've talked about quite small centralised areas such as Greater Manchester and much larger areas. In some areas the advantages will be more on shared good practice and CPD, for example. In other areas that might be students who can get those advantages better and young people that get those advantages better, where they can travel across an area.
And yet we've also heard we've got some of the lead hub areas now which are one local authority still, some which are a couple, and others which are much larger areas. What you were saying about
local authority areas themselves are, of course, wildly different in their size. You know, London, so Birmingham, for example, compared to a Indeed. So compared to a London borough, are on. You know, people tend to think of London is a huge city, but actually it's subdivided into many local authority areas. The Hampshire that I'm from, geographically is, I think, a couple of times probably the geographical size of Greater London. So these things do vary quite a lot.
I understood, and but we also have, I mean, to your point about maybe the rural areas might benefit from more sort of agglomeration. Some of the smaller areas are actually remained in the rural spaces, and we've heard that when the consultations took place, the sector, the hubs themselves, expressed a preference for a larger number. I think it was 87. That was the aim. So what was the logic between going for that smaller number, going for that 43? What was the key driver of that decision?
I let Jenny, so she's much closer to it, especially because of the timing of it, that specific question. But I mean, I think a general observation I would make is you can always argue that the scale that you're talking about is too small, or indeed that the scale is too big. I think what we've been trying to do here is strike a balance, but that doesn't leave it not open to question from somebody who would argue, as I say, in either direction.
Yeah. But you'll have heard from the last panel some of the experts in this space saying that their concern is that some hubs in the new format will absolutely fly and others are being set up to fail. That is a serious concern being raised by experts in the space. So Jenny, to that point, how have you tried to mitigate against that?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk that through. So in January 2023, the model that there were basically three models that were put out for consultation. A regional model, a model around 87 hubs, so more hubs, more local nuance in the structure, and a middle ground model around I guess the example used at that time was maths hubs, where there's about 34 maths hubs, and in that maths hubs.
Mathematics, yes.
So we looked at different models and considered the benefits, whilst the hub lead organisations, the current ones, very much preferred keeping the current geographies and that more nuanced. Actually, some of the organisations that aren't involved directly with hubs but work with them preferred regional models, and there were others with that kind of, they could see the benefits across the models. And the success of the hubs programme isn't just about meeting the needs of the hubs themselves, it's about meeting the needs of all of the organisations that work with hubs to deliver music education and co-curricular activities in those areas. So what we've tried to do is balance those different views of different types of organisations that are involved in delivering that offer across each area.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Andrew.
So you talked about the different sizes, and then we've heard concerns about large areas being too remote from the places that they serve. So in addition to talking about how you're intending to mitigate those risks, I just wonder what the thinking was in terms of the comparisons that the department's made in doing this between teaching school hubs, multi-academy trusts, local enterprise partnerships. Why are they particularly applicable to doing it this way?
I think it's more, Andrew, it's more that they're analogous. So, I mean, a question just came up about maths hubs. So, I mean, we organise subject supports for all sorts of different subjects, including maths, on this hubs base. Obviously, music hubs are different because they involve delivery partner organisation. They involve, loan of musical instruments. They involve a different type of continuing professional development. But the analogy of those different ways of organising, as I say, I think is relevant. That's what I was alluding to in my opening answer. That you can operate at different types of scale. What you're trying to do is establish the appropriate scale to support what is a very large network of schools with a very diverse set of needs.
In terms of analogies, I mean, one that comes to mind is in local government and housing, where the department's constantly pressurising housing associations to merge and to be bigger on some sort of assumption that the economies of scale outweighs the local input and the ability of people to interact with their own housing association. How do you counteract a suspicion that having larger hubs and smaller numbers of them is better for Whitehall rather than actually better for the local area, and it's just because it's more convenient for you and civil servants in the department?
Well, as I said earlier, you can always make a case when you're talking about scale. You can always make a case that it should be moved in one direction. You can also make a case that it should be moved in the other. I think a really important point to make here is that these are the lead organisations we're talking about. This is not about delivery partners, and of course these lead organisations will have partnerships with many other organisations operating at local and per school level.
In terms of consultations about doing this and the scope of not just hubs as the sort of numeric number of hubs, but the way they operate. Damian, you may not know this, but Jenny should. What sort of level of consultation was taking place with independent education providers in terms of the partnership work that they do quite extensively in the music space?
Yeah, can I just go back to your previous question first and say a little more on that, and then I'm happy to come to that point. It's worth just reminding ourselves that this process did begin with that independent research that looked at hubs that were operating across more than one area, and what the delivery in those areas was like. And they found that hubs operating over more than one area didn't see reduced input from delivery partners. It did, in that research, it demonstrated that it freed up management responsibility. We saw more sharing of specialist roles between different areas, so that access to those was more equitable across those areas, more sharing of best practice, more resilience in those hubs to staff changes or to other changes, and other partners outside of the music hubs found those music hubs easier to engage with. So that was an independent report that was done, commissioned by Arts Council England before the process of consultation was undertaken.
Primarily those areas where that was taking place were large urban areas, quite different from so in terms of their characteristics and demographics to the average music hub.
And that's why we then undertook a process of consultation. That was a two-stage process of consultation that Arts Council England took forward, that both set out in the first one the kind of guiding principles and the big picture geography, geographical choices, and then through a second phase went through and actually made changes, some of which you've referred to today, to listen to the results of that first stage of consultation. So that took us into a place where we accepted that in some circumstance it was appropriate to have single local authority authorities, and in others, actually geographical changes where you would have seen existing hubs broken up wasn't appropriate, and existing hubs were kept together in the new model. So that's been a process that's gone through multiple stages to try to respond to geographical need. Also came through in the consultation the need to give time for those new partnerships and relationships to embed, and that's been clear in the discussion today. That's already on Arts
And
Council.
to Andrew's question that he originally asked, and then I'll come to Jen.
Yeah, about the independent education sector and your consultations with them, because the independent education sector's music partnerships are one of the key work they do in the communities that they've...
So the focus groups and the survey was responded to across the board by music, by schools, by independent music organisations, to make sure that we got the breadth, and that was reflected in focus groups too.
And you see the issues conceptually about that it always, not just about this decision, but it always seems to be decisions from the centre, however consulted upon, then being announced to local areas, rather than going to a local area and saying, are you happy with the way things work? And then if they are, they may in Greater Manchester have organically expanded to cover the whole Greater Manchester area because that's what they do, whereas in Northamptonshire they just want to stay where they are, in Shropshire. And if that's what local people and the experts and the people embedded in those communities want, why don't you just let them do that?
Maybe if I track back further, it's worth saying that before the National Music Club for Education, there was a call for evidence to understand music as it was at that point in time and what might be most helpful going forwards.
And there hasn't been a full evaluation of the impact of music hubs since they came in 2011. So why change the structures without an evaluation of how the ones that were set up in 2011 have worked?
So to some extent, some of the things I've mentioned have given the opportunity, not as an independent evaluation, but to feed evidence into this process. And as there's been annual reports in terms of the performance of music hubs, and as we're going forward, we'll be looking at independent evaluation as well.
Thank you. And Jen, you want to come in on
I just wanted to come in on the focus group section. We've heard earlier today that from the focus groups and from the consultation process, I think most recommended 80 plus music hubs, because obviously there's over 118 now, and that would have been quite a significant reduction to 80, but to 43, 44 is almost a 60% reduction. Where has that number come from? And I think I've sort of treaded on someone else's question, but you were just on the topic.
Go, please go ahead.
Sorry. So I think there were different views amongst different audiences in terms of responding to the consultation. So whereas the existing music hubs preferred an option where we didn't move to, where we around the sort of 87 mark, actually some of the organisations that were perhaps on the margins of those relationships saw the advantage of larger geographical areas. And what we've tried to do is balance some of those demands depending on making sure that we understand the contributions of people that are in different places in this system.
Like who?
Sorry, I don't have a list in front of me, but I'm sure we can supply it afterwards. But
sorts of organisations that said that?
So there were charities involved, there were those delivering music services locally, there were schools involved, there were all sorts of different organisations, and I'd be happy to supply a list.
Also, to the point of economies of scale, I'm new to this committee, and maybe everybody knew that there was maths hubs. My son is literally sitting his maths A level right now. I don't know about the hub. What economies of scale are there? Literally break it down to me.
Like if you're running continuing professional development, then being able to run many different sorts, being able to do that over a large number of people, there's a simple economy of scale there. There's
so basically you were training teachers in safeguarding, let's say.
Yeah.
You were training but you'd just be able to do all of Kent and Medway together in one room rather than doing it
not
twice.
necessarily. You might be able to offer them more of a choice of dates because you had a bigger scale. I mean, we're getting into quite specific, which I'm very happy to do.
The thing is, Damian, I mean, there are economies of scale and there are diseconomies of scale.
Also true.
And look,
which is my point about balance. To be fair.
I am aware that when confronted with the potential geography, the local authorities in the northeast of England came together and formed a consortium. But I mean, it's 100 miles from Darlington to Berwick, and and you do get diseconomies of scale when trying to organise training on a geographical area like that.
And just, I mean, again, these are the lead organisations we're talking about.
Yes.
This is not the same. It's absolutely not the same as saying there will not be, in different parts of that part of the northeast, there will not be different, provision on the ground. So, and I think that's an important distinction.
Isn't there a tension there that actually the economies of scale you could generate by moving to regional model, if you go to a lead partner model and you require them to work with all the other partners in the ground, they can't necessarily generate those economies of scale. And so when it comes to flat funding, it's then very, very difficult for them to deliver a really high quality service over the larger area that they're taking on, because they've got to work with the established partners, they've got to carry all the overheads of those established partners, and this comes back to a point about actually whether some of these structures are being set up to fail, is that we're asking them to do more with less, but we're also asking them to do it in a way which carries the cost of all the existing on-the-ground partnerships.
Well, I don't. There's also again the distinction to be made between the lead organisations and the partners who do delivery. That is not to say there will be no change in who are the partners that do the delivery. These are going to be the lead organisations, and they must, of course, work out in their area how they are going to organise things from September. Bear in mind as well, we've only just very recently, of course, had the full announcement on who the organisations will be, and there'll be a certain amount of course, of formation from this point. But they're clearly, I mean, I don't think we're going to have a debate about whether the concept of economies of scale exists. Sure. I mean, you also make a very relevant point. Mr. Mears makes a very relevant point. There are also diseconomies of scale. And with something like music hubs, I totally recognise that, of course, you're trying to balance those balances. And economy of scale isn't the only reason, by the way. We can come back to some of the others. Not the only one, but it's one of them. Trying to balance that against the local responsiveness in what is, it's a people business. And although you may have different delivery partners doing it on the ground, of course, it's very important that relationships are built, and that this lead organisation does understand, of course, the needs of the whole of its area and the diversity of schools within it.
And to that point, though, the measurement of quality of outcomes, you talked about overall aspirations for the National Music Plan. We've heard a lot of support for the aspirations of the plan, but how do we ensure that there are measures of quality in terms of how this is now evaluated? And I heard, what we also heard was quite a lot of criticism of previously being focused purely on participation versus quality and progression, and a lack of key metrics and benchmarks in terms of where we are now. How do you propose to address that?
We are looking at developing performance. I'm not going to say KPIs, because it doesn't lend itself perfectly to that sort of concept. But appropriate measures like the amount of teaching time that there is for music in the early years, how many children at that stage are reaching an early learning goal for musical expression, obviously the number of children who enter qualifications of one sort or another. But a lot of it is ultimately qualitative. And Vicky Ford, when she was here, was talking about some of the, sometimes they're called soft skills. I think there's nothing soft about soft skills, but all the benefits that can come from taking part in making music, either individually or collectively in ensemble, those benefits, which I think are enormous, are very, very difficult to measure. But some of the proxy measures we use are children's keenness to be involved, the amount of time that schools judge it is right to give to music education and music participation. And of course, we are going to have an independent evaluation of hubs specifically over 3 years.
Okay, Jess.
Yeah, so I'm still not entirely clear on the economies of scale that reducing it to 43 has anything more than we could have better training meetings, but we'll come back to that, no doubt. The Music Hub investment programme held several stages of the consultation, and you've talked about how it had to be balanced, and you've offered to provide a list of people who said the alternative, literally all the evidence we've heard.
A list of types of organisations that responded to the consultation.
Okay. Yeah. What feedback did you receive from these consultations, and what changes were put in place following that feedback?
So I think I've covered some of this already. So the first consultation covered the kind of models at a high level. That consultation took us towards a model essentially in the kind of middle ground. The consultation focused, though it's worth saying, both on the kind of geographies but also the process of change, and we've talked a little bit today about it taking time to embed partnerships and to build those local relationships, and so the consultation also reflected on the process and making sure that time is given for those partnerships to develop once they're in place. The second consultation then reflected some of the nuances of geography to make sure that and made some of the changes I've kind of identified about making sure that we weren't sticking so hard, and there was no sort of hard and fast rule on there being multiple local authorities in each hub, and allowed for some single local authority hubs, and also took us down a road of making sure we didn't break up existing music hubs, but they were moved into the wider geographies without being broken up themselves.
So, since the 7th of May, what feedback have you had?
So we're 2 weeks into that period. It's a sort of settling time. There hasn't been a further consultation since, but obviously Arts Council England are leading those conversations with the hubs on that next stage of the journey of settling funding agreements.
Yeah, so you obviously said the first consultation said that they would need time. We've heard from Greater Manchester that it was maybe a 10-year process or longer. You've given, non-publicly, music hubs found out whether they were the lead organisation in April.
Yeah.
So that's 5 months to create a system that should be up and running for September. And we've heard evidence already this morning that some lead organisations aren't creating that partnership environment, and so people are worried about a cliff edge in certain areas. When you said that you had feedback around time, did you not take that feedback into consideration, or what was the rationale behind giving people 5 months?
It would take time for those partnerships to reach maturity. That doesn't mean they need 10 years to get started and to start working.
They're going to be ready by September.
What we've tried to do is leave time for those models to draw data down and take that into the main hub lead organisations for the future to start to build those partnerships so that they're ready to start operating from September. I don't at all pretend you can squeeze that 10-year journey of maturity into that 5-month period. The 5 months is about being operationally ready to start.
What support are you offering the ones that are new that have to start up in September?
So Arts Council England are working directly with all of those organisations. They're working with them to help them develop local plans for music education. That we've talked quite a bit today about the need to make sure those partnerships reflect local areas. So they will be working with those hub lead organisations to develop those plans so that they're ready to start in September.
Excuse my forwardness in that almost everybody said nobody listened to them in the consultation so far. They don't. So sometimes, who hasn't filled in a government consultation when they already knew what the answer was before the consultation had started? There before the grace of God go I. So why is there a disconnect between you saying that you did loads of listening to everybody in the consultation and literally everybody saying nobody listened to us?
So you've heard from quite a small number of the hub lead organisations today. I'm not sure that they necessarily reflect the full views across the piece, and of course some of the benefits were seen by organisations that were less engaged with the hubs. The consultation responses are a matter of record, and the committee can see them.
But you also heard, in terms of the partnership working, we've heard concerns about one local partner with a strong performance record who have not been chosen as a lead partner, but the only contact they then have with the lead partner is a request for data. Surely that's not what you should be wanting to see, and what can be done about that in terms of making sure that there is a proper partnership discussion going on in areas such as Kent and Medway.
We also heard from a really good example where that partnership was brokered before the application process. So they went in as equal partners to that process.
Yeah.
And that example isn't isolated. There's been some really good examples of that partnership working. We're 2 weeks beyond the point at which these announcements were made. Hub lead organisations are getting information from Arts Council England to help them and support them in that process of going out and building those partnerships. But I wouldn't at all expect us to be in a place of kind of formed partnerships and clarity for the future 2 weeks into this 5-month process.
But is there any extra support that either the department or the Arts Council should be giving to delivery organisations on the ground who have the capacity to deliver here and need to be plugged in with the new lead partners?
Yep, and that support will come through Arts Council England officers who will engage with those hub lead partners to plan for the future.
Okay, Mohammed?
Thank you. Minister, there have been many concerns about the level of funding available for music hubs. Are you satisfied with the funding? Do you think the funding is sufficient for the programme to meet its aims?
Well, you're quite right. You're quite right that we want to be, and we must be, ambitious for what we do in music and the arts more broadly. You can always make an argument, and a good and compelling argument, for spending more money on any of these things. We do spend, in addition to core school funding, and of course, music as a subject, it's a curriculum subject, primarily is about school resourcing. In addition to that, we do spend £79 million on hubs, and of course, and there are various other funding items as well, and we want that to be. It's a lot of money. We want it to be used as effectively as possible to support schools, and we know that participation in things like whole class, ensemble teaching is at an encouraging level. We do know as well. Well, in fact, there's a capital funding pot coming of some £25 million to increase the supply of musical instruments. There's already a lot of musical instruments available through the hubs for children to access. So yes, I think all the activity that the hubs support is good and it is healthy, and I want to grow it further. I want as many children as possible being involved in making music themselves or in groups.
Okay, the Music Mark, a membership organisation for music education, says, these are not my words, it's their words, the funding to deliver the national plan for musical education is stretched to the breaking point. There has been no inflationary increase of the total grant since 2018-19. How do you defend this?
Whenever we talk about anything to do with educational funding, I fully recognise that there are challenges in managing budgets to do all the things that we want to do in school, including with music. We do also have record levels of school funding, including in per pupil real terms. So we've got funding for schools at £60 billion for next year. The money that comes through the music hubs is in addition to schools' own budget. Schools also contribute, by the way, to hubs, and there are also parental contributions as well, which add to that £79 million figure. But yes, of course, I totally understand why. First of all, there are challenges managing with the resourcing that organisations have, and also that, of course, they and we and you, all of us, want to be able always to do more.
So, do you think that the National Plan for Musical Education is at breaking point?
No, I do not. I think the National Plan for Musical Education is an ambitious, forward-looking document that we have to deliver on. And I think with the aspects that we have it in place, and the excitement there is around making music in schools, I think we've got every reason to believe that we can.
We all know that the funding hasn't been increased with the inflation rate. So are there any plans in the future to increase funding in line with inflation and also pupil numbers in the future?
Well, you will know that we do. I mean, look, we do funding for everything in this country, regardless of who is in government. We do it on the basis of periodic spending review, period budgets, and there will be a new spending review before too long, and that will determine what's in the spending plans of HM government for the period from 2025 onwards. But there is already considerable amounts of subject support that goes into music education. It's a unique subject, actually, in that sense, in the degree of that. I think it's, by the way, absolutely right that it should be. It is indeed a unique subject, and there will always be a strong case to be made for supporting music education and music participation, and indeed, for individuals who can progression into professional musicianship.
So, the question was, will the funding increase with the inflation rate in the future?
Yeah, I thought I did sort of address that by saying, a slightly roundabout way, but
can you be clear? Please?
But Mohammed, to be super clear, there will be a budget, a spending review, and that will determine. The Department for Education. We will make our bids. We always make strong, ambitious bids for funding for all aspects of education. Other departments make their bids as well, and ultimately, we get a spending review settlement set out. But what I was trying to say was, notwithstanding all that, there is clearly a very good case to be made for investment in this part of what we do.
Just on that, there are three things, it strikes me, key priorities for the department. Attendance, which we know that engagement in music and other activities can make a big difference to children's attendance. The Prime Minister has set a big bar by mathematical performance. There's a strong correlation between musical engagement and mathematical performance. And in other areas, we've increased over the last decade funding for sparsity, for instance. We've heard one of the big concerns from music hubs serving sparser rural areas is that there's no differential in the funding on that basis. And in fact, when it comes to sparsity and increasing pupil numbers, they therefore face a challenge. Surely there's a logic, therefore, for the department to be considering bids to the Treasury when it comes to this at the next spending review. I'll leave that there, Minister. I know you can't preempt those things. But Mohammed, did you just want to come back on the capital?
The final question. We have heard criticism of the capital grant funds for musical instruments, in particular, that the money cannot be used for repairs. Why is this, and do you plan to change this in the future?
Look, it's capital money, so it's investment in musical instruments. There is some give in that, so it can include some musical equipment. Also, we're very keen that we have adaptive musical instruments available for children with special educational needs and disabilities. What we don't want it being spent on is, although music technology, of course, has a really important place in music, and that's why some related equipment is right, but it shouldn't be going into general technology. But it is a fund to increase the stock of musical instruments.
Jenny, can I just come back on the detail of that? Because I guess we have heard a lot of concern in terms of the practicalities of this, in that one of the most cost-effective ways in which music hubs can protect or increase their stock is by repairing existing instruments or indeed adapting them for meeting disabilities. And yet the rules around the capital requirement seem to make them rely on their revenue funding for those activities. Why is that?
So capital the rules of capital funding are that the purchase has to last at least a year, it has to have at least that lifetime, and there is a minimum threshold of spend. That's not unique to music, that is just the difference between capital and revenue funding. We've talked a lot about repair and maintenance of instruments. We are not against that. That absolutely can be done through revenue funding, as it is done now through revenue funding, but we are not allowed to try and count revenue funding as capital in this grant. This is an additional injection into our musical instrument stock over and above the support that we give through revenue funding. We've seen some great examples of repair happening. The team have been out to different local authorities to see some of the work that's done there. We are absolutely not against it. Please keep repairing those musical instruments. Please don't use
could I
capital
ask,
funding.
and therefore, if a music hub had some musical instruments which they needed to have repaired, could they give them to a music repair outlet and then buy them back at the repair cost?
I'm not going to answer that question if you'll allow me to pass. I'm sure they would talk to their accountant about the rules at that point.
But I think we've also heard some quite serious concerns, though, that this may unfortunately incentivise some more expensive providers at the expense of less expensive providers, or indeed buying instruments second-hand, which might be perfectly workable. Are those things that you can look into in terms of the working of the scheme?
So we'll be establishing a supplier framework to make sure that there is high quality, longevity in the musical instruments that are available, and to make sure that they offer value for money as well with the buying power across the frame. There will of course be exceptions allowable to that framework where the circumstances mean that the right instruments aren't available or equipment aren't available through that framework. But the rules of capital and revenue are fairly well established.
Ian, Jen?
Oh, no, it's fine, it's been answered.
No? Okay. In that case, just wanted to touch on the teacher pension scheme and the issues and the concerns we've heard about that. I mean, I guess there are sort of multiple levels of concerns, and what we've heard is that this isn't a new problem, it's something that's happened over a long period of time, that more teachers in the music hubs universe have moved out of the teacher pension scheme because of cost pressures. In my experience, having looked at TPS issues from within the department, there's always a frustration, but it ends up costing the department more to fund the TPS in the public sector if other organisations are driven out of it. So surely the department's main incentive should be to keep as many people in the TPS as possible, and that actually that ought to be there. I understand there has been a letter to say that you'll provide some funding to keep people in. I think we've heard concerns that may not go far enough. And particularly for some of the local authorities, local authority run schemes, it doesn't necessarily meet all their costs. But also for those who have already left, where does that leave them? Do they miss out? We've heard that consultation processes are already well underway. How do we make sure that there is a fair and level playing field that means that teachers who are supported by the National Plan for Music Education and music hubs have a decent chance of being part of the teachers' pension scheme?
So you're quite right, Chairman, that we have put in place protective funding differentially for local authorities and non-local authority provisions, based on the fact that local authority employed teachers, there is a legal requirement that they are in the TPS, and the funding protection is up to the end of the financial year. And as we were just talking about, what happens after the end of the financial year is a matter for future, of course, for future spending reviews. For the non-local authority provision, we have provided extra funding till this August, so to the start of the new academic year. We're also we of course need to understand fully what the financial pressures are, and we are doing some work. We're going to be doing some work to understand that more fully. That one should not infer from that we necessarily do something different, but it's very important that we understand, as I say, what that financial situation is. The non-LA hubs are, of course, not in the same position of having that legal requirement on being part of the TPS.
But therefore, the expectation would be if a non-LA hub is the lead hub in an area, that after August, teachers supported by that hub, even if some of them might have been local authority teachers before, might be taken out of the TPS.
Well, I don't think we should infer anything like that directly. The TPS is an expensive pension scheme. It is one of the best pension schemes in Europe from the point of view of the individual. But it does have a high. I mean, actually not. But it does, because it has a high employer contribution. You mentioned the point about it costs HMG more if there are fewer people. To some degree that is true, but also over time, I mean, the dominant cost in the TPS is the actuarially calculated liability, and as people live longer, and thank God for it, that's a wonderful thing, but it does mean that when you have what's already a generous DB, defined benefit scheme, it becomes considerably more expensive, but also better benefit to the individuals concerned.
And when you've got a challenge with recruitment and retention, and particularly in some of those areas, surely that is a benefit that you want music hubs to have at their disposal in order to be able to attract the best teachers.
So I get the TPS. Look, overall in the education world for teachers is a really important benefit. I think it's very important that we are able to communicate fully its value. So I know we're wandering slightly off topic, but for a new graduate coming into teaching, and so as well as looking at what the relative starting salary is in being a teacher versus some other job, actually if you look at the imputed value of your pension, that adds a considerable sum on top. That also applies to those who benefit from the TPS as part of a music hub. It is quite unusual these days to be in a defined benefit scheme of the type of the TPS, and obviously quite a lot of people involved in education in the wider sense are not necessarily these days in the TPS. We should not infer, as I said at the start, that inevitably people will leave, or there'll be consultations about coming out of the...
Those consultations are ongoing with a number of hubs.
There will be some, yes, I recognise that. We are going to do some work to understand what the financial pressures are and what the situation is.
Having had, in preparation for this committee hearing, I have spoken to my local hub, and they have actually successfully had an adjournment debate around the teachers' pension scheme, particularly of the kind of inequality that it has as charities. They have some people that are on it, or they're now looking at how they cut staff to either take it on or take it off, and how they then fund. It's clearly going to reduce either the quality of teachers, which reduces the quality of output. What's your answer to that?
Could I just add to that? Jen's excellent point is that this model was promoted by the department, and it wasn't promoted on the basis of hubs taking it on and saying, yes, we'll do this because that means we won't be able to treat our teachers the same way as people in other models. And you can't encourage people to be autonomous and creative and independent and then say to them, but the funding won't follow it. So we want you to take this path, but then the people who take it won't be in the teachers' pension scheme, and those who stay stuck in the previous model will. So why would anyone want to do it?
No, look, and Andrew, I mean, we're not saying that. It is the funding for the hubs is a block grant. Is a block grant type of system. It is true that since then the resetting, recalibration, whatever the correct word is, of the employer contribution rate on the TPS has changed. And as I said, we are going to be making sure we look at that, we analyse it fully and fully understand it. It is also true that the benefit that you get through one particular type of pension scheme people in other occupations don't get, or they get it through salary, or there's all sorts of different permutations that you can have. But look, what we want to understand, what the pressures are.
You want to understand what the pressures are. I mean, it strikes me, obviously, it would have been good to understand what the pressures are before you went through this process of reforming the hubs.
They happened, Robin. They did happen at the same time. So the TPS revaluation was happening sort of in parallel to this process.
Just on the, we have a monitoring board for the National Plan for Music Education. Have you had reports back from it yet, and are you satisfied that the plan is on track to meet its targets?
We have had reports. I think they've met four times, and a very good and very committed monitoring board, who also hold our feet to the fire quite rightly, I think we are cautiously optimistic about progress against the plan, but there's always more that we need to do. We know that we want an hour of quality music a week in key stages 1 to 3. We're at about that level on average in key stage 3, so in lower secondary school, but we need to do more in primary school. We have good numbers of children doing whole class ensemble teaching and other types of tuition. But as we said right at the start, we will always have ambition to go further.
So what is that ambition? What metrics can you set out for us in terms of the quantity and the quality measures that you're going to be using to judge success of the national plan?
Well, the single biggest one is the hour a week. And the hour a week, there's always, from a head teacher's point of view, there's always difficult decisions to be made about the marginal, allocation of time in the curriculum. And if we can get the hour, as I say, get that delivered consistently, that would be that's the single biggest thing. But there are many other things as well about participation. We want healthy numbers of children doing qualifications at the end of secondary school, right at the other end of the scale. We want to make sure that music is widely embedded in early years education to develop that really early love of music. We want to make sure that children, whatever their background, can have access to learning an instrument, to singing in a choir, to playing in an ensemble. We'd love to see more. Somebody, I think it might have been Vicky earlier, was joking about Eurovision Song Contest entrance, but there is a sense about different types of elite progress measurements. And of course, we have in this country, we have one of the leading music businesses in the world, and we want to keep supporting that, as well as the cultural enrichment and education of children.
And just, with regard to that particularly, and this committee has always taken a strong interest in the challenge of closing the attainment gap, removing barriers of disadvantage. You'll have heard some of the concerns that have been raised about children may have the opportunity to experience an instrument, participate in an ensemble, but then don't have the opportunity to see it through to progress. Isn't measuring progression, particularly for those cohorts, particularly for pupil premium children, a really important part of what the department needs to be doing? And I'm aware that the Arts Council sits on huge amounts of data in this space. How much attention is the department paying to that data in terms of what the music hubs are achieving already and what more they can achieve?
Well, look, there's the data and then there's the actuality. What we actually care about is it happening? The data is a way of tracking that. We do want to make sure that pupils of all backgrounds are able to access all those things that you mentioned. Pupil premium can be a way of supporting that, but so can the loan scheme itself. Children in care, of course, looked after children, have entitlement to free music tuition. We are about to be announcing the details around our new progression fund. That's for a relatively small number of disadvantaged children, but I think a really important project. And on things like the music and dance scheme, of course, we also look at the backgrounds of the children who come onto that, which of course is an intensive, high-end programme. But yeah, of course, we'll be wanting to look at overall data on participation.
It's worth saying as well that Arts Council England have published annual reports on Hub's performance. They undertake regular surveys, and some of the results of that survey will be published later this year. So there'll be more data coming out on some of those goals, particularly teaching time, later this year. That's in addition to the work that will happen through the monitoring board to develop an impact framework, which, as the Minister's explained, is both qualitative and quantitative in the data it carries out. It will look at demographics as well as geography in terms of impact, and that's in addition to the evaluation that will be independent. So there are 3 strands to understanding the performance of the hubs and the progress on the plan here.
And if a hub in one area falls badly behind on those metrics, what can the department or Arts Council England do about it?
It's the Arts Council England who will lead that management relationship with the hub lead organisations, and you would expect them to have conversations about performance as those indicators show how hubs are doing.
Thank you. I think it's been a useful session. We will be writing, I think, to the department a number of follow-up points, but I'm grateful for your time today, Minister, and thank you to everyone who's given evidence.
Thank you to all your members. Thank you.
Order.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.